On the day a boy named Leo Vance was kicked out at 18, his stepmother handed him a key to a slaughterhouse she said was worthless and told him to be grateful for the scraps. What he found inside that building did not just give him shelter, it saved him in ways he had not known he needed saving. If you have ever been handed the worst thing someone could think to give you and been told to count it as a blessing, hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. The day I turned 18, my stepmother handed me two things across the kitchen table: a black garbage bag with a drawstring top and a manila envelope that had been opened and resealed so many times the flap would not stay closed anymore. She did not look at me when she did it. She had the expression of a person performing a task they had been rehearsing long enough that the actual moment held no drama for them, just a box to check, a loose end to tie off. She told me I was an adult now. She told me the house was hers, legally, after my father's death, and that she had been generous to let me stay as long as she had. She said the word generous, the way people say words they need you to hear, loudly, as if volume makes them true. The garbage bag held everything I owned: 2 pairs of jeans, 4 t-shirts folded flat, a jacket too thin for the season, a worn paperback with a broken spine, and a photograph. The photograph was of my father, taken years before everything went wrong, standing in front of a long, low building with his hand shading his eyes, squinting at whoever held the camera. He was not smiling exactly, but there was something in his posture, a kind of squared shoulder readiness, that I had carried with me without understanding why. The envelope held a deed, a letter from a lawyer I had never heard of, and a key. My stepmother told me my father had left me a property. She said the word property in a tone that made it clear what she thought of it. A slaughterhouse, she said. Out past Ridgefield, shut down for 20 years, condemned by the county, not fit for anything but demolition. She told me the outstanding transfer fee was $5, and she slid a $5 bill across the table with 2 fingers, like she was touching something unclean. She told me to take it and go, and that she had done more than anyone could reasonably expect. The sky outside was the color of cold cement. A November wind rattled the windows and pushed brown leaves across the driveway in tight spirals. I stood on the front step with the garbage bag over my shoulder and the envelope in my hand, and I thought about opening it right there. I did not. I walked to the end of the block. I found a bench at the bus stop, and only then did I sit down and read the letter inside. It was from a man named Mr. Alistair Finch, attorney at law, with an address in a town called Ridgefield I had never been to. The letter was dated 4 months after my father's death. It informed me that I was the sole heir to a parcel of land consisting of 8 acres and 1 structure, formerly operated as a livestock processing facility, currently cited by the county for structural deficiencies and classified as abandoned. The letter was careful and formal and gave no indication whether Mr. Finch thought this was good news or simply news. At the bottom, in smaller type, it noted that a development company called Blackstone Realty had submitted an offer of $7,000 for the property, contingent on immediate acceptance and transfer within 30 days. I read that line 3 times. $7,000. I thought about a security deposit. I thought about first and last month's rent somewhere. I thought about winter coming and the jacket in the garbage bag that would not be enough. Then I thought about my father in that photograph, standing in front of that long, low building with his shoulders square and his hand up against the sun, and something in me that I did not fully understand said, "Not yet." I had no idea the envelope in my hand was about to change everything. I took the bus to Ridgefield because I had no other way to get there. The ride was long and the bus was cold, and the city fell away behind me in layers until there was nothing but rolling hills and timber and fields gone brown at the edges. The air that came through the cracked window changed somewhere past the 20th mile. The exhaust smell gave way to something cleaner, colder, pine and damp earth, and the mineral scent of a place with good water. I got off at a crossroads store at the edge of Ridgefield, where the county road turned to gravel. The man behind the counter was older, with hands like knotted rope and a flannel shirt washed soft as velvet. I asked him where I could find Mr. Finch's office. He looked at me for a long moment, and then he pointed up the street to a brick building with tall windows and told me 2nd floor, 1st door on the left. Then he asked if I was all right. No one had asked me that in longer than I could easily remember. I told him I was fine. He nodded slowly, like he did not entirely believe me but respected that I had said it anyway. The office of Mr. Alistair Finch smelled of old paper and furniture polish and pipe tobacco that clung to the curtains and the spines of the law books lining the walls. The man himself was small and precise. With a neatly trimmed white beard and wire-rimmed spectacles, he looked at me over rather than through. He did not make small talk. He did not offer condolences. He sat behind his desk with his hands folded on top of a thick folder and spoke in a voice like gravel stirred slowly in a wooden bucket. He told me about the property. 8 acres on the north edge of Ridgefield, bordering county forest land on 2 sides. The structure was a livestock processing facility built in 1957, operational until 1989, shut down after changes in federal inspection requirements made small independent facilities uneconomical. The building had sat empty since. The roof was intact, but the county had cited it for foundation drainage issues and interior deterioration. He paused before he said the next part, like he was choosing his words carefully. The building had a certain reputation locally, he said. People did not go near it. It was not, he said, a welcoming place. Then he slid the second letter across the desk. Blackstone Realty. $7,000, immediate close, no inspection. He said $7,000 was more than the property would appraise for in its current state, and that I should consider the offer seriously. I thought about the bus station. I thought about the garbage bag with everything I owned inside it. I thought about my stepmother, sliding that $5 bill across the table with 2 fingers. Then I thought about my father. I thought about the way he stood in that photograph, shoulders square, ready for something I could not see. I told Mr. Finch I wanted to see the property before I decided anything. He looked at me over his spectacles for a long moment. Then he reached into the folder and pulled out a key on a length of cord and pushed it across the desk toward me. He told me the property was 3 miles north on the county road, left at the split-rail fence. Follow the track to the clearing. He told me to be careful. He told me the floor inside was concrete but uneven, and that I should not go into the east wing, which had been structurally compromised. He told me all of this in the same level voice, without judgment, the way a man gives directions he has given before and expects to give again. I took the key. I walked the 3 miles because I had no other choice. The track past the split-rail fence was 2 ruts through scrub and second-growth alder, the ground hard and frozen beneath a thin skin of old leaves. The trees thickened as I walked, and the light took on a gray quality, filtered and cold. Then the track opened into a clearing, and I saw it. The building was long and low, perhaps 100 feet end to end, with a corrugated metal roof gone orange with rust and walls of poured concrete stained dark with decades of weather and organic matter I did not want to think about too closely. Small windows ran along the upper edge of the walls, most of them broken, the glass still clinging to the frames in jagged teeth. The main door was sheet metal, streaked with rust, hanging slightly crooked in its frame. There was a loading dock at the east end, the concrete apron cracked and heaved, and beyond that, the damaged section Mr. Finch had warned me about, a sagging roofline and a wall that bowed outward in a way that made it clear something inside had given up. The whole structure had a weight to it, not physical weight, something else, the weight of a place that had witnessed a particular kind of labor and never quite shed it. I stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at it, and my first thought was that my stepmother had been right. My second thought was that I had walked 3 miles to get here, and I was not turning around without going inside. What I saw waiting for me there made every reasonable part of my mind say leave. I am grateful I did not. The key turned in the lock after some resistance, and the metal door scraped open on hinges that screamed. A wave of cold, stale air washed over me. Concrete dust and rust and mildew, and beneath it all something faintly organic, faintly sweet, the smell of a place where things had been broken down and rendered, and the residue had soaked into the walls. I stepped inside and let my eyes adjust. The interior was a single long room, the ceiling perhaps 12 feet high, supported by steel I-beams at intervals. The floor was poured concrete, cracked and stained, sloping slightly toward drains set into the surface at regular intervals. The west end of the room, where I stood, was relatively intact. The east end, where the structural damage was, had been partitioned off with a chain-link fence and a handmade sign that said, "Unsafe, do not enter." The windows high on the walls let in thin shafts of gray daylight that cut through the gloom and illuminated nothing useful. My footsteps echoed. I walked toward the center of the room slowly. There were remnants of the old operation still visible. Stainless steel hooks bolted to an overhead track, a rusted pulley system, concrete troughs along the walls. But someone had cleared most of it. The floor, despite the stains, had been swept. The space felt less abandoned than paused, like someone had locked the door expecting to come back. And then I saw it. In the exact center of the room, sitting on a wooden pallet to keep it off the damp floor, was a steel footlocker. Military style, dark green, the paint worn at the corners, the hasp secured with a padlock that had rusted but held. Next to the footlocker, weighted down with a chunk of concrete, was a sheet of paper in a plastic sleeve. I walked to it. I picked up the paper. My name was written on it in my father's handwriting, large and deliberate, Leo, and beneath that one line, "The key for the lock is taped under the loading dock apron, southwest corner. You'll have to dig for it, trust me." I stood in that cold room with the paper in my hand, and something moved in my chest that I did not have a name for. Then I went outside. The loading dock apron was exactly where it sounded like it would be. The southwest corner was crumbling, the concrete broken into fist-sized chunks. I pulled at the loose pieces and dug into the soil beneath with my hands, and 3 inches down my fingers found something metal and smooth. I pulled it out, a small key in a plastic bag, taped shut with electrical tape that had held against the damp. I went back inside. I unlocked the footlocker. Inside, wrapped in canvas sheeting, were bundles. I lifted the first one out. It was heavy. I unwrapped it. Cash. $100 bills, bound with rubber bands that had hardened and cracked with age. I set it on the pallet. I lifted out another, the same. I counted 5 bundles in the first layer. Then I pulled back the canvas and saw a second layer, and beneath that, a third. My hands started shaking before I finished counting. Somewhere north of $40,000, maybe 50. My mind would not hold the number steady. Beneath the bottom layer of cash, lying flat against the floor of the footlocker, was a leather notebook and an envelope. The envelope had my name on it. I sat down on the cold concrete floor with my back against the footlocker and opened it. "My son," it began, "if you are reading this inside the building, it means you came. I was not certain you would. Your stepmother will have told you this place is worthless. She needed to believe that. I needed her to believe that. I am sorry for what that cost you. I am sorrier than I know how to say for all the things that came before this." I put the letter down. I looked at the shafts of gray light coming through the high windows. I picked it up again. He had bought the property 11 years ago, after the slaughterhouse shut down, for almost nothing. He had bought it because the land beneath it sat above a natural aquifer, a deep, clean water table that fed the Ridgefield municipal wells and extended under 200 acres of county forest to the east. A geological survey firm hired by Blackstone Realty had identified the aquifer 6 months before my father bought the property, and Blackstone had been trying to acquire the land quietly ever since. They wanted it not to build on, but to control, to own the recharge zone, to own the water. My father had hired his own surveyor on borrowed money. The survey confirmed what Blackstone already knew. The aquifer's primary recharge zone ran directly beneath the old slaughterhouse and the 8 acres surrounding it. My father had filed a water rights claim with the state, citing the original 1891 county survey language that granted surface and subsurface rights to the deed holder. The claim was contested. It had been in review for 9 years when he died. The documentation was in the leather notebook. Certified copies of the survey, the original deed language, the state filing, and the correspondence with the Water Rights Commission. He had saved the cash separately, year by year, off any books, against the future, against taxes, against the moment when the claim would resolve and Blackstone would come back with a number large enough to matter. He had hidden it in the one place he knew no one would look, the building everyone believed was worthless, the building that carried a weight people did not want to stand under. His last paragraph was underlined. "The place looks like what it was. I am not asking you to forgive that, but what it was is not what it is. Underneath the history is the water. Underneath the weight is the deed. Underneath the worst thing I could leave you is the best thing I could build. Don't sell it, Leo. Make them pay for access. Make them pay for what is underneath. I folded the letter. I sat on the floor for a long time with my back against the footlocker and my father's words in my lap. Then I put the letter in my jacket pocket next to the photograph, and I understood for the first time why I had been carrying that photograph all along. The weeks that followed were the hardest and the most purposeful I had ever spent. I moved into the building because I had nowhere else to go. I sectioned off the west end with salvaged plywood and built a small room inside the larger space. 4 walls, a door, a wood stove I bought secondhand from a man named George, who ran the hardware store in Ridgefield and who let me run a tab without once making it feel like charity. I insulated the room with fiberglass batting I found in a reclamation yard. I patched the roof where it leaked. I scrubbed the concrete floor with lye soap and a stiff brush until the stains were ghosts instead of declarations. It was cold work. It was lonely work. It was the first work I had ever done that felt like it was building towards something that would hold. The county water rights claim resolved 4 months later. The state upheld the original 1891 deed language. The aquifer beneath the property was confirmed as a primary recharge zone for the Ridgefield municipal water table, and the deed holder retained full surface and subsurface rights. Mr. Finch called me at the payphone outside George's hardware store to tell me. His voice, which was generally dry and level, held something I had not heard in it before: satisfaction. Quiet, patient, hard-earned satisfaction. Blackstone Realty requested a meeting 2 weeks after the claim resolved. I walked into Mr. Finch's office on a cold Tuesday morning in March. 2 men in expensive suits sat across the table. They had the practiced warmth of people who negotiate for a living, and who have learned that warmth is a tool like any other. They talked about community development and regional planning and the importance of working together. Then one of them opened a folder and slid it across the table. $200,000, cash purchase, immediate close. I thought about the concrete floor I had scrubbed. I thought about the small room I had built inside the larger space, the wood stove burning low, the sound of my own breathing in the quiet. I thought about my father standing in front of this building with his shoulders square and his hand up against the sun, and the line he had written, "Make them pay for access." I said no. The man with the folder stopped smiling. I told them what the aquifer represented. I told them about the recharge zone and the upheld state claim and the 1891 deed language. I told them that whoever owned this property owned, in perpetuity, the primary water source for Ridgefield and the county forest reserve beyond it. Then I told them what I was prepared to offer instead: a 75-year water access covenant with fixed below-market rates for all Ridgefield residential users, written into the deed as an encumbrance that would survive any sale or transfer. A conservation easement on the 8 acres prohibiting any surface development that could compromise the aquifer. An annual contribution of $8,000 to the Ridgefield Water Infrastructure Fund, administered by a board of residents. In exchange, Blackstone received stable, legally documented access to the water they needed without the risk or cost of continued litigation. The second man started to say something. I looked at him and he stopped. They left without answering. Mr. Finch sat beside me with his hands folded on the table and said nothing for a long moment. Then he looked at me over his spectacles and gave a single small nod that felt to me like the closing of a very long chapter. They signed 6 weeks later, every provision unchanged. The afternoon the agreement was recorded at the county clerk's office, I walked back to the property alone. The day was cold and bright, the kind of March day where winter and spring argue in the wind. I let myself in through the metal door that no longer screamed on its hinges, and I stood in the center of the room that I had scrubbed and cleared and made, against all reasonable expectation, into a kind of home. I had wired the building for electricity the month before, with help from a retired electrician named Walt, who had known my father, and who showed up one Saturday morning with a tool bag and a willingness I had stopped questioning. I reached for the switch I had mounted on the wall. I flipped it. The overhead lights came on. 4 industrial fixtures I had salvaged and rewired, flooding the space with clean white light that fell on the concrete floor and the steel I-beams and the small plywood room I had built in the west corner, and made the whole interior look, for the first time, like a place where someone actually lived instead of a place people avoided. I stood in the light and thought about my stepmother handing me that $5 bill across the table with 2 fingers. I thought about the word worthless and the way she had needed me to believe it. I thought about my father spending 11 years building something he would never see finished, trusting that I would be stubborn enough or desperate enough or angry enough to hold on. It was not a slaughterhouse anymore. The history was still there, in the drains, in the stains I could not entirely scrub away, in the shape of the space and what it had been built to hold. But what it was now was something else entirely. It was a home. It was mine. And beneath the floor where I stood, the aquifer was running the way it had run for 1,000 years, cold and clean and constant, feeding the town below without asking anything in return. I stand in the doorway sometimes in the early morning, before the light fully comes, and I listen to the forest at the edge of the clearing and the particular silence of a concrete building that has decided it is done being ashamed. The footlocker is empty now. The money went to taxes and repairs and the legal costs of making sure the covenant was airtight. But the notebook is on a shelf in the plywood room, and the photograph of my father is beside it, and both of them are exactly where they belong. My father could not leave me a house with a white fence and a front porch. He could not leave me something easy or clean or without weight. What he left me was the hardest thing he could imagine. A building everyone wanted to forget, sitting on top of something no one could afford to ignore. He trusted me to see past the surface. He trusted me to go inside anyway. The worst thing someone can give you is sometimes the best thing they know how to build. My stepmother handed me a key to a slaughterhouse and told me to be grateful for scraps. What she did not understand was that my father had spent 11 years turning that slaughterhouse into a foundation. And foundations, as it turns out, are what you build everything else on top of. If you have ever been handed something ugly and been told it was all you deserved, I want you to think about what might be underneath it. Not always money, not always water rights. Sometimes just the knowledge that someone, somewhere, built something difficult and left it for you on purpose, trusting you to be the kind of person who walks through the door anyway. Tell me in the comments about a time you were given the worst and found the best underneath it. I want to hear it. I read every single one. Thank you for listening.